Hey everyone, Wazoo here, and this is another video dedicated to helping you learn Spring Boot 3.0. Yes, the new Spring Boot 3.0 is out, so let's get started with creating your first application, which will be a to-do application. Yeah, you may have seen an earlier video I've done that focuses on Spring Boot 2.7, I believe the version was we used. And while a few things have changed in Spring Boot 3, for the most part, a lot of the syntax, a lot of the way that Spring Boot works is still the same as it was in 2.7. There's just been a bit of overhauling under the hood, but for now, let's get started on going through a quick demo. Yeah. So right in front of us, we've got our Spring Boot 3.0 to-do application. We've got our display here a list of to-dos that we want to create, that we want to work on, sorry. So let's create a to-do and let's give it a description. Record our first video. I can't spell, that's all right. Add the to-do, and then let's create another one and editing our to-do video. No problem. So once we create that, we can see that we got both of them highlighted in yellow for things that are not yet completed. And let's go ahead and just update the first one. We'll set it to completed. And you can see that the background changes to green just to give it some visual representation that we've completed our to-do item, right? And then we can even delete them like so. So yeah, so that is our basic to-do application. And in this video, like I said, we are going to go through creating it with Spring Boot 3.0. I can't wait. Let's get started. Okay, so here we are at the start.spring.io website, and this is, as always, this is the place to go for starting your new Spring Boot application. It's a generator type of website that packages everything you need in a quick starter for you. And you can see that for Spring Boot 3, it's been updated. We've got now additional options of we can either create a project in Groovy or use Kotlin or use Maven. So Maven is still my preference. Perhaps I'll switch into others in the future, but for now, let's just use Maven. Language, we're going to stick with Java. And for Spring Boot, we're going to be using the 3.0.0 release. And for our artifact, we're going to be just calling this Spring Boot 3 to-do application. Okay, and then let's scroll down a bit more. And we want to package it as a jar. And one of the new additions by default is that Spring Boot 3 uses Java 17 native. Well, yeah, by default, it is the set Java version. So we're going to keep it at Java 17. We haven't really been using anything when I've chosen higher versions. We haven't really been using anything version specific that require that. So we'll just leave everything at the default, make it easy. And then now it's time to add some dependencies. So first we're going to be adding DevTools and Spring Boot DevTools, and then we're going to be adding Thymeleaf. That's another important one. And then we're going to be adding Spring Data. Well, Spring Web, let's add Spring Web first, and then Spring Data, Data JPA, and then we're going to be adding H2, and then we're going to be adding validation, and we're also going to add Lombok, and I do believe that's it. So let's go ahead and hit the generate button, and then just download and extract the zip file that comes down anywhere you want on your computer. And then let's go ahead and open it in your favorite editor. Okay, so I'll have to manually zoom in on the left here on this pane to go through it, but the traditional package or folder structure that we use in the older versions of Spring Boot 2.7, etc., remains the same. So we've got our POM.xml file, which is our Maven definitions, our Maven configuration file that that Spring Boot will use for its project. We've got our cross-platform MVNW commands or files, that we can execute on Linux and Mac as well as Windows. we've got just a basic help file that details links for documentation and other useful guides that you might want to pull up at some point. And then we've got our traditional git ignore file to just ignore the usual things like editor files and maybe databases, things like that, local databases that you may not want to check into source control. And then in the source folder, if we expand that out, we've got a main and a test folder tree. So underneath the test one, of course, is where we'll be putting, when we write them, we'll be putting Spring Boot tests. And it comes with a stubbed test file for you here. And then under the main folder is kind of where we will be spending the majority of our time in this video. We've got a package structure com.example.springboot3 to-do application, along with our main entry point for Spring Boot. And then we have the resource folder, which contains anything like JavaScript or our HTML markup pages, as well as our application.properties, which is our sort of central configuration file for Spring Boot. So let's go ahead and open up the application.properties. And let's first we'll define, by default, our server will listen on port 8080, but we can override that with specifying any port we want. I'm going to leave it at 8080. This is just sort of a way to demonstrate what kind of configuration options that Spring Boot will provide. And then let's go ahead and add some H2 database configuration options, which we'll be needing. So here we're defining a URL for our database to be a local file in the data folder. It'll show up here in our project called demo. And then we're assigning a driver class name of org.h2.driver. And then we're defining a username of admin and a password of password, and defining a dialect for our database platform configuration setting. You don't really need to memorize these. These are settings that you can cut and paste between all of your Spring Boot projects. Once you've set it up and got them running the first time, then you can kind of just keep them around for future projects. So we want to enable the H2 console, which we'll be going through in this video. And this is sort of a web-enabled database viewing tool of the local H2 database that we'll be using in this application. Okay, and then we're going to be adding another setting here called spring.thymeleaf.cache, and we're going to be setting that to false. So by default, this is true in a default configuration. And what happens is that if you make changes to our Thymeleaf markup, then they don't always get picked up by Spring Boot when you want to rerun the server. So I like to leave this off for development and just remove it when we want to, let's say, host it somewhere when we've got our final list of Thymeleaf pages, HTML pages. And then let's use 3 more settings here, which will help us with displaying SQL in the command console as we're running the server. So first, we need to use this Hibernate DDL auto to update. And basically this means when we work with our under the covers, the Spring Boot data dependency will automatically configure a lot of our internal SQL and database calls that the app will be using under the cover for us, that we won't have to manually generate or create. And so this is sort of a helper to indicate that we want to regenerate our internal Hibernate structure whenever whenever the application senses updates that are made to our objects that we're defining in our application here, our models. Then we want this JPA show SQL. This will display all of the SQL that's getting used internally. It just just helper to get you familiar with what kind of SQL is being generated under the covers by Spring Data, and just taking a look at what kind of results and queries we're sending. So we've got our basic application configuration properties here. Let's go ahead and start this up just to make sure that everything starts up and running without needing any more additional changes. So if you'll notice, or if you might notice, if you're more familiar with the older versions of Spring Boot, there's a few additional messages coming out in the default logs. First off, let's see. We've got messages around what kind of profile we're going to be running. We're not going to be going into it in this video, but there's a way of defining different profiles for use in Spring Boot. This really makes it handy when you want to work on your application locally, which is usually in a kind of developer mode type of idea, and then when you want to take the same application and put it on a cloud server or host it somewhere, and that traditionally means you're using a quote-unquote production level type of profile. So you can change and make configurations slightly different between those profiles, which is really handy. So we have a message here about logging level. It looks like we've started up Tomcat successfully, listening on port 8080. And then we've got a bunch of H2 related messages coming out in the logs. So displaying that our H2 console is available at H2 console. And we'll be going through that in a minute here. But first we've got our everything set up. So we've got our server up and running. So let's go ahead and we'll stop that for now. Let's minimize this. Okay. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to create a TodoItem model. And this is sort of the base object that contains information that we want to track for every to-do item. So in our Spring Boot 3 project here on the left, let's close that up. Okay, so let's create a new package in the root here, and we'll call it models. And then we'll go ahead and create a new class, and we'll call it TodoItem. Okay, so we'll make use of some annotations here to help with defining our object. So we'll use the getter and setter annotations of Lombok. And then we'll use an entity annotation, which is what we need for Spring Data. And then we'll define a table name here of to-do_items. So we've got our public class of TodoItem, and we're going to be implements serializable. And let's go ahead and resolve that reference. Okay. So the first thing we're going to need to do is define an ID field. So we'll use an ID annotation and a generated value annotation of strategy equals generation type auto, and then a private long ID. So let's go ahead and resolve all these. So this is basically just signaling we're defining what type of sequence that we want to use for generating our IDs. And auto is just a basic sequence generator, which we'll see in the logs when we start this up. So let's finish this up here. So we're going to create a string to hold our description. And then we're going to create a Boolean field to track if our to-do item is complete. And then we're going to create a instant to track when our to-do is created and when our to-do is updated at. Okay, and then what we're going to need to do is, whoops, I don't want to, okay. And then because we're implementing the serializable Java class, we are going to, or interface, sorry, not class, we're going to define an override here for the toString method, which makes it handier to display our to-do item in our logs coming out. So we're going to return a string format of to-do item ID equals %d, sorry, %d, description equals %s, is complete equals %s, and created at equals, and we just want to display the date in a string format, so let's %s that in quotes, and then an updated at equals %s in quotes. And then let's close off that, and then we will use, this is a really long line now, so let's get to the next line here. We'll use ID description is complete, created at, and updated at. Perfect. Okay, and we're done with this class. That's all we need. So now back in our to-do application root package, let's create a sub-package called repositories. And this is just where we're going to be defining the interface between our application and the database. So let's create a new Java class. It's an interface, and we will call it TodoItem repository. Okay, and we are going to be extending the JPA repository of making use of a map of to-do item and long. So let's go ahead and pull that in, and then we need to use the repository annotation here. And that's really all we need right now. Yeah, pretty awesome. And then finally, what we're going to do is let's go ahead and create a to-do service. And this service is what we're going to be using for interfacing with the actual to-do item repository. So when we want to add a new to-do item, when we want to get all of our to-do items that are in our database, we'll be working via the service. So back over here in our root project, let's add another package. We'll call it services. And let's just call it to-do item service. Okay, and we're going to use the annotation of service. Perfect. Okay. So first of all, let's pull in our repository. So let's use the auto-wired annotation to pull in the to-do item repository. Okay, and let's go ahead and resolve that. And then what we're going to do is we need a getAll accessor method. So let's call it iterable to-do item getAll, and we are going to return to-do item repository find all. Perfect. Let's do a single one by ID. So a public, we're going to wrap this in a optional structure. So to-do item get by ID, and we'll be passing in, if we give it an ID, then we will return to-do item repository find by ID and use that ID. Okay, that's all resolved. Okay, now let's do a save. We want to create a new one or save an existing to-do item into the database. So we'll call it a public to-do item save, and we'll be passing in a to-do item that we want to work with. So if our ID is null, then that means that we are creating a new to-do item. We are passing in a new one from the website. So let's double check that. So if to-do item get ID equals null, then what we do is we set the created at to be instant.now. And then we want to, for every update, we want to set the updated at to instant.now. Let's go ahead and import that. And then what we want to do is we want to return TodoItem repository.save TodoItem. Perfect. Okay. And then the last one on our list is the delete mechanism. So let's go ahead and create another public function. We'll call it void delete, and we'll be passing in the TodoItem that we want to delete. So all we have to do is TodoItem repository delete the given TodoItem, and this will return nothing. So that's that. Okay, so we have a service that we're interfacing with the repository, which is referencing and handling our TodoItem object. So we can't really see anything yet if we start up the service right now. So let's go ahead and let's create a controller to start accessing our TodoItems. So back in our project here on the root package here, let's create a new package and we'll call it controllers. And let's call this one home controller. So new Java class home controller. And let's give it a annotation of controller. And then let's use the auto-wired annotation to pull in that TodoItem service that we just created. TodoItem service, TodoItem service. There we go. Sometimes it looks like I'm using the latest version of IntelliJ, and maybe sometimes it doesn't pull in those references properly. I'm not sure what's going on there. Anyways, so what we need to do here is now define a get mapping. So this will be our root controller handler. So when we first come to the website, we're making a get request to the server, and so it will take a look at our controller paths and resolve it to this method that we're creating right here. So what we want to do is we want to return a model in view, and we'll just call this one index. You can call this function whatever you want. We can call it root, or we can call it default, but let's call this one just index for now. And so let's go ahead and create a new model and view object, which is a Spring Framework UI object to work with. And we'll just call we'll call the constructor model and view, and we'll use the view name of index. And for now, what we're going to do is model and view, we're going to add object, and we're going to call this object TodoItems, or call this key TodoItems, and what we're going to be passing is the TodoItem service get all list. We're going to pass that to the front end. So return model and view. So we've defined our view name here as index. So what this means, is that in our templates folder, it will look for a index view file. In this case, it's going to be a index.html file. So within the templates folder over on the left here, let's create a new file, and we'll just call it index.html. And I'm going to paste in some beginning markup that we can use here. So let's define our doc type, our HTML. We're using the Thymeleaf namespace here. And then let's create let's define a head section. And what we want to do is then open up with a body. And then let's define a div. And then let's give our application a title, Spring Boot To-Do application. And then let's create a table to display all of our to-do items that are in our database. Okay, so we'll start with this. So we'll see we're making use of, okay, so we've got a table, HTML table markup defined here of body, and let's end this. Okay, good. We've got a HTML table, we've got a t-head section, and we're defining our header row here of with columns of actions, ID, description, is complete, created at, and updated at. And so what we're going to do is, remember, in our controller, we are passing our to-do items from the service. We're getting them from the service, dumping them into this model in view object, giving it a key name of to-do items. And so Spring will automatically push this object. It'll make it available from our view, so from our HTML here. So what we can do in our table is we can go through, we'll create a row, and we'll use a th:\each. So basically for each item in our $to do items. So this is the syntax, the Thymeleaf syntax for working with a list. And then we're going to give it so we've got a row. So for each to-do item in the list, we're going to pull one out and reference it as item. So we're going to create a new cell, and the text of our cell, so th text, will be equal to the $curly bracket item ID. Okay, and then the next column is our description. So we're going to be using a th:\text, and we'll be using the $item.description to display the description of the to-do item. And then what we want to do is we want to display the is completed flag. So let's go ahead and create a _td. And then what we have to do is, just because we're working with a Boolean, we kind of have to convert the true and false of a Boolean to something more human-friendly, I guess. So let's call this a span, and so we're going to use a conditional, so th:\if. So if the value of item is oops, hit enter there too quickly, is complete, equals true, then our th:\text value will display yes. And let's close off that span. And then we need to create another span, so unless, and then we can make use of the same item is complete equals true. Then our th:\text becomes no. Okay, and then let's go ahead and display our dates. So display our date columns here. So we're referencing our item created at date and our item updated at. And we don't really need this here. This is sort of just a helper for us. But the th:\text values will be populated. And that should be it. Let's see, we've got actions. Okay, so we've got an actions column, so we'll be putting buttons in there. So let's just for now use the non-breaking space. Okay, so we'll have an initial empty column to begin with until we add actions into this application. So let's go ahead and run it. Let's just make sure that this comes up and that we've got no errors with anything that we've put together so far. Okay, I see it starting up and listening on port 80. And this is our generator that I mentioned in our model. Remember, we're using the strategy of generation type auto. And so what Hibernate will be doing behind the scenes is it's created a sequence of to-do items to use as the ID whenever we generate a new to-do item. So Hibernate will keep track of that Spring Boot data, which uses Hibernate under the covers, will keep track of that for us. And so we're going to be using port 8080, as I said. So let's go ahead and go to port 80, localhost 8080. And you can see, let's give that a little bit more readability. And you can see that we have got our table being displayed now along with our application. So nothing is coming through, of course, because our database is empty. So let's go ahead and create a way to add a new to-do item to the system. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to use Bootstrap to handle some of our CSS layout, as well as give ourselves some prettier looking buttons, as you saw in the demo. So if we open up our pom.xml file, and let's go into, let's scroll down into our list of dependencies here. So let's go at the very bottom. Let's create 2 new dependencies. We are going to be pulling in the Bootstrap 5.22 project, as well as the Bootstrap icons, which are both available at the Maven repository. I've included the link here in this pom.xml, which will be in the source code. All the source code will be available at my GitHub. I just wanted to mention, I'll mention it again at the end, but it's all available in the links in the description down below. So you'll be able to navigate there and see where I'm referencing these jar files from. Okay, so we've dropped that into our pom.xml, and so with the help of IntelliJ, we can just use Maven and reload project, which will allow IntelliJ to pull down the necessary dependencies that we've added to this pom.xml file. So let's go back into our index HTML template here. And what we're going to do is we are going to reference the new Bootstrap CSS that we've just pulled down, which is in a WebJar. And so back in the head section here, let's paste in, we're using the th:\rel equals style sheet, and then a th:\href, and we are going to be referencing the path of where WebJars get pulled into our project with Spring Boot. So you can see we're referencing the 5.2.2 bootstrap min.css, and then at the bottom of our page, let's just add the script in case we ever need the JavaScript. Let's add it before the last closing body tag. And we're going to be referencing the th:\source, and then we're referencing the path to our Bootstrap JavaScript file. Okay, so let's go back here into the markup and apply some classes just to give ourselves a the Bootstrap friendliness. In table, we want to add some additional classes here. And then what we're going to do is at the very bottom underneath the table, we're going to add our create to do button markup. So when at the bottom of after table here, let's cut and paste, or I'm cutting and pasting, sorry. I'm cutting and pasting a button definition. So let's make this a little bit easier to read. So I've got a p tag, and then a link, an anchor tag, using some Bootstrap classes to the path of create to do. And then we're just making use of some icons here to style this button a little bit, and we'll give it the button text and create a to do text value. So let's go ahead and start the service. And remembering in our application properties how we disabled Thymeleaf page caching. So if we refresh our page, we should see the new updated CSS thanks to the help of Bootstrap, which we do. So now if we hit the create a to do button, we're going to get an error because it doesn't have a mapping up to create to do. So we are going to change that. Let's go ahead and stop the service here. So what we're going to do is we are going to create another controller here, and I'm just going to call it To-Do Form Controller. So this will kind of track our to-do form requests. So let's go ahead and create a new Java class, and we are going to call it To-Do Form Controller. And so we're going to make use again of the controller annotation. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the auto wired, and we are going to make a reference to the item service again, to do item service. And so we called our method create to do. So let's define it now. So we've got a get mapping of /create -to do. And then what we're going to do is public string show create form to do item. We're going to make use of to do item. Actually, we don't even need that. Show create form, and then what we're going to do is return, and this will be the name of the view that we're going to be returning to the application. So we're going to call this one new to do item. Anyway, let's keep going. So we're passing back the new to do item view. So let's go back down into our templates folder here, and let's create a new HTML file, and we will call it new to do item.html. And a lot of the top half is the same as the index. You know what? Let's just make it easier in ourselves. We'll copy the whole thing. So Control A, select the whole file, and we will copy it into new to do item, and then we'll just change this table. We'll change everything here in between the container sections here. Okay. So let's create a form. So what I want to do is let's create a row and give ourselves a margin top of 5. And then we want to do a div class equals call to, and this will be a back button. So we want to display a back button to just give our user a helpful way, a friendly way of going back to the home page. So we're going to be defining a link element, and then we're going to be using an icon of the back arrow, or an arrow facing left, and our href is going to be slash, and with the text of back. Okay. And then let's go into our new column, which has the actual form. So we're going to be using a div class equals call 6. And then we'll give our little form a title. So add a new to do item. And then let's define a form. So a form, I'm sure you've used HTML forms before. This is exactly the same, just with a few different syntax additions of Thymeleaf to work with our application. So we want to define a default action of just hashtag, and then a th action, a th colon action of ampersand / to do. And this is basically the endpoint that we want to submit our form to. And then we've got an object that we're referencing in the form is a to do item. And we want to post it back to we want to post this form. Okay, so let's create a form group. And let's create a new label. So for description, we've got a description. And then a input class equals form control. And then let's add more to this. Okay, so we want to type equals text. We want a th field, so we're referencing the field of star description, which will come in handy when we're editing a description. It will map. It's going to be mapping our to-do object, our to-do item object that we've referenced in this th object of the form. It will map the description field to that. So we're assigning an ID of description, and we can use a placeholder if we want. We'll just call it description, and then that'll be it. Let's close that up, and then let's create a submit button. So this is just a regular HTML submit button. I'm going to cut and paste it, the one I came up with in here. So let's just make it a little bit easier to read here. So we've got a button of type submit. We are giving it a Bootstrap class of btn and then outline success. And then we're defining an icon for it and then a label of add to do. So once we click this button, it will then attempt to submit via post to the /todo endpoint or action. I call them endpoints, but the HTML form lingo is called action. So assuming this works, we can test it now, but I think what I want to do is at least have a something defined to catch that to-do post. So what we're going to do so what we're going to do now in our form controller is we're going to make a mapping to listen for that post call. So let's use the post mapping annotation, and we're going to be using /todo, and then let's create a public string create to-do item, and we need to make a use of an annotation called valid, which is a helper validation Spring Boot method. We're sending in a to-do item. And let's see, there's a parameter here called binding result and model. Okay, so what we need to do is first create a new to-do item. So item equals new to-do item. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the description from the item that is coming through in this, that the form is passing into this method. And then we want to set the completion flag. So set is complete with the to-do item get is complete. And then what we want to do is use the to-do item service to save this new to-do item. And then we want to return back to our home page. So we want to return a redirect to the root path. Function created here. So just to recap, we're generating a new to-do item. We're setting the description based on what we're passing in the field through the form, which Spring Boot will then pass into this function. And then once we save it, we will redirect to the root of our application, to the URL root of our project. So let's start this up. And it started up okay. So let's go ahead and refresh. Looks okay. So let's create a to-do. Oh. Let's see what the error is. Neither binding result for be named to-do item available as a request. Okay. So what we forgot, which is what I took out, is in our to-do form controller here, where we just were, in the show create form, we need to keep this to-do item as a part of it. Okay, let's restart this application. Just to be sure. Okay, so let's create. Okay, so we got our add a new to-do item form. Let's give it a description, a brand new to-do item. And we'll hit add. And we can see that it's now being displayed on the home page of our application. We've got a brand new to-do item. It's not complete, so by default false. We created it. We've got 2 timestamps for the created and updated at. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at the database now that we've got some data in there. So open up another tab and navigate to HTTP localhost 8080. And we're going to be looking at the h/h2 console. So all of these, the JDBC URL, this matches the JDBC URL from our source code. Let's go ahead and reference that back in the application properties. See, we've got this data source URL. So that matches this JDBC URL here. And if you recall, we used a username of admin and a password of password, and hit the connect button. And now you'll see that we've got a web interface to the database. So we've got a table here called todo_items. So if we click on that, it will automatically generate a query for us called select star from to-do items. We'll run it, and this will display everything that's in the database in that table right now. So you can see that we've got our new item that we've just created. Brand new item is complete, is not set or null. And we've got our updated at timestamp and our created at timestamp. And here's the given ID that we got from the sequence, the Hibernate sequence. So this is looking good. We've got a good table structure here, and we've got data populating coming in. So now what we can do is, and we can do other, we can fill in, we can use some other SQL here to, let's see, we can select star from to-do items where ID is equal to 1. And if we run that, we should get the same because there is only one record. So we'll get the same thing. So if we, use an ID of 2 and try to run that, then we'll get nothing because there's no existing. So this is just to demonstrate that we can use some valid SQL in this editor window here to also work with our database. Okay, so back in our application, so let's create a editing button. So let's go ahead and go back to the index template. And what we're going to do in that actions column, remember how we just left it as an empty ampersand here. So let's create 2 new buttons here. And this will be for our edit and delete buttons. So deleting is easy. So is editing, actually. So let's go ahead and just make this easier to read for you. So we've got 2 buttons that we're defining here. I created a little group, a Bootstrap syntax here for just creating buttons that are closer together. And then on one button, we've got a edit, and on the other one, we've got a delete. So on our href for our edit button, we've got a path of /edit and then the ID. And so what we're using is the item ID of the to-do item, which it'll fill in as a link for the edit button. And then for deleting, same thing. We're using the th:/href, and then we're using a ampersand path to /delete and /ID, where ID is the item ID of our current to-do item that's in this table. So let's now update our form listener to listen for the edit and deleting messages here, or URLs. So let's use, we can stop that now. So we can use let's go ahead and use the delete one first. That one's a lot easier because there's no actual form to display for that. So /delete and /ID is all we have to define, and Spring Boot will fill in what that ID value is during runtime. So let's do a public, if I can spell, public string delete to-do item, and then we're going to be making use of the path variable annotation because we're looking for an ID. And I think we need to use long ID. And then by default, Spring Boot will pass in the model. So what we want to do is to do item service get by ID, and because we're returning an optional, we're returning a to-do item wrapped in optional, we can also make use of another handler called or else throw. And then we can pass in a function, so just new a legal argument, basically an exception if we're trying to reference a to-do item that doesn't exist in the database. So to-do item exception, to-do item plus ID. We can just do something like not found. Close that off. So that's just shorthand for another way to do this is to create an optional to-do item. You may have seen this kind of way in the past, to-do item, and then we use to-do item service get by the get by ID call, and then if to-do item is present, if I could spell is present correctly, so is present, then we pull out, we use the to-do item get to reference the actual item that's wrapped in the optional, and then work with that. So this or else throw syntax replaces sort of all that kind of logic. And then what we want to do is to-do item service delete the to-do item, and then we want to return ourselves to the home page. That's it. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's try this out now. We've got an existing record in the database. So let's go ahead and see if we can pull it up. So we've got our edit and delete buttons. So let's go ahead and try delete, and it works. Let's go back and make sure here. We can see the SQL that Hibernate is generating here, where we're deleting from the to-do items where ID equals question mark, which is the ID that we've passed in from the form. So I don't think model is being used, but let's just leave that in there for now. Perfect. So far, so good. So let's go ahead and now work with the editing. So let's define another get mapping, and we want to use /edit/ID. Again, Spring Boot will populate that ID parameter with it'll match it up to this. I'll show you in a second here. So show update form, and let's call it, we're needing to pass in a path variable of ID. And then so what we want to do is we want to make the same call that we just did in the delete. So let's go ahead and cut and paste that. We want to look through the to-do service for the given to-do item. Okay. And then what we want to do is the UI model that automatically gets passed into this function with Spring Boot. We want to add an attribute. So basically we want to add that model back to the view. And we'll just call it to-do, and we'll reference the to-do item, and then we'll return to the edit to-do item view. Okay, so basically, I mean, we're doing almost the same thing as what we're doing for the delete. We're using the to-do item service to request the to-do item given with the help of the ID from the path. If it doesn't exist, then throw an exception. Otherwise, tag it as with the attribute name of to-do into the model, which then gets sent back through the view, which we are defining here as edit to-do item. So let's go ahead in our templates and let's add our last template and call it edit to-do item. And just to go make things a bit easier, let's just cut and paste what we put together for the new to-do item. Let's just cut and paste that whole HTML file. So let's go new HTML, and let's cut and paste this whole file and put it in the edit to-do item. And then let's go ahead and change some things here to make sure that we know where we're at. So we want to edit to-do item. And then let's go ahead into our form, and we have to define our form a little bit differently. For our action, we want to use /todo squiggly ID, and then we want to open up a squiggly and define that ID is equal to the string of to-do ID. And then we want to surround this with another end squiggly, and the object that we're referencing is just called to-do. And our method is post. Okay, so we've got our same description layout here, and our same mapping of star description will map to our to-do item. And then what we got to do is add another field for the checkbox. So we need to add let's put this in a class here, just to separate out the layout here. And then column 6. And then after that, we'll close off. Then we want to add one for the checkbox. Okay, so we've got another column div here for our form checkbox. We're using a Bootstrap class of form check input, and we're matching this using the Thymeleaf field helper to the isComplete property of that to-do object, and we're going to be setting the checked value if the isComplete is set to true. And let's see, we want to update. We want to change the button text to say update. And then another thing that we'll need to do is just make sure that we keep track of the, keep track of the two date fields. So they'll be coming through to the front end as hidden fields via the type hidden, and then th field equals the created at and updated at properties of this to-do item. And okay, so far we should be able to, let's go ahead and run this, and we'll be able to see what's going on here. So back in the application, let's create a new to-do. Let's call it a second to-do. And then we've got our two options here of editing or deleting. So let's go, we know delete works. So let's go ahead and hit edit. And it brings us to our form. And we can even update the text. It's going to error out as soon as I hit submit. But at least the form works and it comes up okay. But you'll notice when I hit update, it will then run into an error because we haven't yet defined this to-do method here, or handler, sorry, not method. But let's go ahead and then go into the back end and finish up defining this to-do handler here. Let's see. Okay, so let's go back into our form controller. And this will now be a post mapping for our /todo ID. And then what we want to do is we want to return a string, which is going to be basically a view, like where we're going to send the application after we edit this to-do item. But let's just call this update to-do item, and we're using again our path variable ID, which is a long, and then we've got a valid helper for TodoItem. And then we've also got a binding result and a model that gets automatically injected. A lot of this is boilerplate Spring that we don't really need to worry about. Okay, so first let's again update our get our to-do item that we're passing in from the front end. And then let's to-do item, let's see, we want to set is complete. To-do item get is complete. So maybe we've updated that. And then we want to set the description to be the to-do item get description. So all that looks good. Let's just call this item. So item. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to save this. So to do item service save to do item, or save item, sorry. And then what we want to do is we want to return again to redirect. We'll use the redirect helper of Spring Boot to get us back to the home page of the application. Okay, let's test this out. Okay, so we're at the home page. Let's go into edit. We want to call this one another to do. And we're going to check the completed flag and let's hit update. And we can see that our description has changed to another to do. It's updated to be yes. And we've now gotten an updated at timestamp, which is different than our created at. So we can see that it was actually updated. And even on the server output here, we can see that the SQL that Hibernate is generating to actually update the to-do item that we want. Okay, that about wraps it up for this adventure today. We created our very own to-do application using the newly released Spring Boot 3.0. And we've gone through the basics of putting together a Spring project with models, repositories, some services. We were looking at Thymeleaf templates and even adding your own properties, configuration properties to the Spring Boot configuration file. I hope you enjoyed the adventure today. If you liked what you saw, just give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Comment down below if you have any questions on what we went through. And if you didn't like it, I just wanted to thank you for watching it so far, and have a great day wherever you are in the world. Have a good one, everyone. Peace.